Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the relaunch of the Pacific Islands Report. My name is Keone Williams, Information and Publications Officer at the Pacific Islands Development Program, and I'm honored to start today's event. Before I introduce our lineup of speakers, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our regional diplomats and distinguished guests. We are honored to welcome Annie Kaneshiro, Honorary Consular Agent, Consulate of Tonga, and also Dean of the Consular Corps of Hawaii. We also have with us James Neich, former Ambassador of the Federated States of Micronesia. We also have Josh Masao, Vice Consul, Republic of the Marshall Islands Consulate in Honolulu. Calvin Miyazoe, Vice Consul, Republic of the Marshall Islands Consulate in Honolulu. Uel Naito, Consul General, Consulate of Palau in Honolulu as well. We'd also like to acknowledge those who may be joining us online from various consulate generals. We are also honored to have with us Peter Arnaud, Dean of the College of Arts, Languages, and Letters at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And do we have Bill Dorman with us? Bill Dorman, there you are, Vice President and News Director of Hawaii Public Radio. Thank you so much for joining us. And I also like to recognize all of our distinguished guests with us here this afternoon. I would like to note that the Pacific Islands Development Program joins all Council of Regional Organizations of the Pacific or CROP agencies in observing Thursdays in Black, a global campaign to end all forms of gender-based violence and to stand in solidarity with victims and survivors of such violence. Today's event marks a significant milestone in our ongoing efforts to partner with the Pacific Islands and to amplify Pacific voices and Pacific expertise. We are privileged to have with us today 3 distinguished speakers who will share their thoughts on this important occasion. First, please join me in welcoming President Vares-Lum, President of the East-West Center, who will share about the significance of this event.
Mahalo nui loa Keone and aloha mai kako, and also want to acknowledge, of course, our wonderful, beloved governor, former governor of the state of Hawaii, Governor John Waihe'e, who will have a long, eloquent introduction, governor, a little later, as well as Dr. Moyer, who is our Center for Pacific Island Studies at the University of Hawaii, and Dr. Mary Hattori, our Pacific Islands Development Program Director, and our senior diplomatic fellow from the State Department, Tony Groibel, and many other distinguished guests who are here today and online. Thank you so very much for being here. Today is a special day, and having you all here with us in this space, in this historic place, with so many stories and so many histories, and those of you coming over the internet from across the world and across the oceans to join us, how honored we are to have you here. You know, the East-West Center has long been dedicated to fostering relations and understanding among people and nations of the United States, Asia, and the Pacific, since 1960. But really, it's been about 50 years, and Governor Waihe'e is going to tell us a little bit more about that later. Not that I'm calling you out, Governor, but okay, thank you, Governor. Ratu Sirkami Sesemara, Fiji's first prime minister and forefather of the Pacific Islands Development Program, along with Governor George Ariyoshi. Well, when he was here, he delivered a lecture at the East-West Center about 50 years ago on the currents in the Pacific. And it's only fitting that we launch the Re-envisioned Pacific Islands Report with a discussion on the Pacific Way and the tides of change in the Pacific. The Pacific Islands Report, or the PIR, has been a vital source of news. And I got to talk to the ambassador back there, and he said that it has been in the past. And today, its relaunch is a testament to the East-West Centers and the Pacific Islands Development Program's commitment to this region. In fact, the PIR directly relates to the East-West Center's 3rd strategic pillar, which is to partner with the Pacific Islands. And this important occasion also celebrates the fulfillment of our objective to amplify Pacific voices and expertise by revitalizing a credible Inclusive Pacific Islands Report. Now, there are many speakers. It is my pleasure to introduce a very special partner, Dr. Alex Moyer, the director of the Center for Pacific Island Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, of which I am a proud alum of the UH, who will speak about the academic contributions and the partnerships that support this very special initiatives. Dr. Moyer.
Thank you, President Susie. Your warmth and vision and energy came across so clearly, makes it a very hard act to follow. Good afternoon, everyone. Ali, Hapade, Buenas, Mogathin, Renanim, Yahweh, Aloha Maikako, Yorana Tato, Ulavanaka Level Marolele, Lofalava, right? Rotukoto, Tenakoto, Danito, and other greetings from across this sea of islands. It's a great honor to be here today with you to celebrate this momentous occasion. The Center for Pacific Island Studies is the only academic program in the United States to focus on the entire Pacific region, and we have always prioritized the dissemination of knowledge, education, and research about the Pacific region, its peoples and communities. We are also, since 1973, the only national resource center under Title VI federal funding for the region, recognized and supported by the U.S. Department of Education for 50 years now. With a faculty of more than 40 regional specialists, including our core faculty and affiliates across the university, a dynamic student program that includes both graduate and undergraduate offerings, and a thriving publications program, the relaunch of the Pacific Islands Report aligns perfectly with our mission, both at the Center for Pacific Island Studies and across the University of Hawaii. The initiative of our colleagues at PIDP, the East-West Center, that we collaborate with, this initiative exemplifies the power of collaboration between academic institutions and nonprofit organizations in promoting regional understanding. I'm especially pleased that the Pacific Islands Report features Oceania Currents, a new podcast series by the Center for Pacific Island Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Through audio format, we share voices, stories, and conversations with crisscrossing currents between the past, present, and future that now flow deep and across Oceania and beyond. We look forward to continuing our partnership with the Pacific Islands Development Program, the East-West Center, and other collaborators to ensure the Pacific Islands Report remains a beacon of reliable information and a platform where news and views from across the Pacific are amplified. With that, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Mary Hattori, the Director of the Pacific Islands Development Program at the East-West Center, who will discuss the goals and impact of the Pacific Islands Report. Mahalo.
Thank you, Dr. Moyer. Such a wonderful partnership. It's so wonderful to see so many supporters of the Pacific Islands Report here and online. It's such an honor. This project has stalled, and the Pacific Islands Report was on a hiatus because of fiscal constraints for several years. And so seeing this dream become a reality through our great partnerships and leadership under President Vares-Lum, and with an amazing board behind us and a great team in the Pacific Islands Development Program. This is such a momentous occasion, and we thank you all for joining us. Since 1980, the Pacific Islands Development Program has served the nations and peoples of the Pacific through innovative capacity building, interchange among regional leaders, and policy-relevant research on priority issues. The relaunch of the Pacific Islands Report is a crucial part of these efforts. For years, the Pacific Islands Report provided a platform for voices across the Pacific to be heard. This re-envisioned Pacific Islands Report is not just about staying informed on current events in the Pacific Islands. It's also about creating a platform for voices that are not typically heard outside the Pacific Islands. In addition to featuring Oceania Currents podcasts, The PIR website now features Visions and Voices, a fresh quarterly publication featuring essays, articles, commentary, and concise pieces relevant to the Pacific Islands region. This is a multimedia section that has videos, in-depth interviews with leaders and influential figures from the Pacific, and other forms of media and expression are on this website. Additionally, we're pleased to now organize our regional news roundups around the thematic areas of the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, the strategic plan, the map for the future, endorsed by Pacific heads of governments in 2022. As the only crop agency in the North Pacific and the only one based in the United States, this re-envisioned Pacific Islands report ensures that PIDP continues to serve our Pacific and US-based audiences, including Pacific diaspora communities, with news and views from across the Pacific. As we expand our reach and deepen our coverage and invite you to join us in this effort, we remain committed to providing timely and relevant information to all of the communities that we serve. Thank you all for your continued support. We're excited about the future of the PIR and the positive impact that it will have. Thank you. Keone.
Thank you, Dr. Hattori, and thank you to all of our speakers for your really kind and generous words. Now we will move on to our first talk story, which will expand upon our own East West Center President Vares-Lum's Visions and Voices article entitled Navigating the Pacific Way, a conversation with Governor John D, Waihe'e III. Please join me in welcoming to the front of the room our moderator, East West Center President Vares-Lum, and our esteemed guest, former Hawaiʻi Governor John Waihe'e III, and East West Center Board of Governor member. By way of brief introduction, Governor Waihe'e III served as Hawaii's 4th governor from 1986 to 1994 and was the first U.S. governor of Native Hawaiian descent. Previously, he served a term in the Hawaii State House of Representatives and was elected lieutenant governor under Governor George Ariyoshi. Since leaving office, he has worked as a nationally prominent attorney and also serves as a member of our East West Center Board of Governors. Before I pass the floor to our moderator, I would like to ask that President Vares-Lum help me to present to Governor Waihe'e a gift on behalf of the Pacific Islands Development Program and the East West Center. This gift is an original copy of PIDP Dialogue from the summer of 1993. PIDP Dialogue was the official communique for PIDP, and according to then PIDP Director Dr. Sitiveni Halapua, its aim was to share with the Pacific Islands some of the news and ideas associated with PIDP activity. In many ways, the Re-envisioned Pacific Islands report continues this legacy. Notably, the front page of this issue reads, 4th Pacific Islands Leaders Conference in Tahiti Nui, a convening that Governor Waihe'e participated prominently in. His portrait is featured there on the front page and also on page 5. Governor, mahalo nui for your leadership and service to Hawaii and also to the Pacific Islands region. Now, without further ado, I'll pass the floor to
Mahalo nui, Keone, appreciate it. And we're going to mic up the governor here for a moment. But just for our audience, as he's getting mic'd up here, I just really want to thank Keone and the Pacific Islands Development Program. Can we give another round of applause? And of course, our great partnership with the University of Hawaii Center for Pacific Island Studies. You know, one of our first Visions and Voices pieces, I'm so grateful they accepted it, was a wonderful interview with our former governor and our board of governors, also chair of the finance committee. Was a talk story time, and it's entitled Navigating the Pacific Way, a conversation with Governor John D. Waihe'e III. And, you know, growing up, here in Hawaii, those of you I grew up and not in elementary school, Governor. It was a little later. I was older, so don't worry. But you were the governor of the state of Hawaii. And it's just amazing. A leader for many of us who watched you take on amazing challenges for Hawaii, the Pacific, and the world. So it is quite an honor to have this talk story time with you, to ask you a few questions.
Thank you.
To expand on our earlier dialogue and article that you can find on our Pacific Islands Report website. So I wanted to start off, Governor, maybe, if you could just share with us just some opening comments and maybe about your upbringing here in Hawaii that influenced your views on your own Pacific identity and leadership.
Oh, well, first of all, aloha, everybody.
You're mic'd up.
Oh,
Never mind. Never
Yeah,
mind.
aloha, and or as we used to say growing up, how's it? Yeah. This is thank you for this gift. And any of you can come and look at my picture when I was 50 pounds more prosperous than today. I grew up on a big island, and actually, it was kind of, in a sense, isolated. You never really thought about the rest of the world, particularly, except when you're in school or if you see the foggy TV or something like that. Most of the time, you just sort of living a lifestyle. And later on in life, you find out that lifestyle translated into many places. And the kind of life, because it was built on, first of all, an appreciation of the ocean. The good thing about growing up on Hawaii Island was I literally did this when I was growing up. You could actually go up to Mauna Kea and play in the snow in the morning and actually eat the snow. Can you imagine? The thing was so pure. We used to take up syrup, shave ice syrup, and just put the snow together, put it on. And then in the afternoon, you go swimming quite high in the beach. And so that's in a way, and everything was built around family. I mean, not only as a young Hawaiian growing, but everybody sort of, you start with the idea of family, and then community is family, and the like. And I have a good friend now, and I told him once, he was trying to describe what it was like growing up in Hakalau, which is close to Hilo on the Big Island. And I said, the difference is we call ourselves us guys. Us guys from Honoka'a, us guys from Hakalau, and what are, and that to most people everywhere, that sounds like a nice way to say us bunch of friends, which is kind of true. But if you're going to do it sort of the Hawaii way, we say us guys from someplace. See, because the understanding, and I guess the foundation for the Pacific region, is that identity is tied to place. See, it starts with the Aina. It starts with the land. So you say, us guys from Hakalau. We hate those people in Hilo. You see, that's, so yeah, how does growing up in Hawaii influence you? Well, it provided me with a value system that was very compatible to the people that I would later on get to meet in the rest of the Pacific. And we share a number of things. We share an appreciation, again, for the ocean, for the Aina, and for the idea that you have to take care of these things so it can take care of you. And I don't care where you go in the Pacific, if you don't do that, if you don't understand that, your thinking is really incompatible with the people living there. And one of the great challenges, I think, for the East Center is translating the culture of a continent or continents, really, both ends of the Pacific, continents where for hundreds of years, resources are thought of as being infinite, available. I mean, if you don't like your neighbor and you happen to be in Delaware, go west, young man. Go, plenty space. If you don't like your neighbor and you live in Honokaa, ain't too many places to go. So you better start getting along. Anyway, that's a long way to answer your question, and but that's formative, and that gives you an understanding of where we are.
Thank you, Governor. You're setting the stage of how important it is on being tied to place, family, responsibilities. What was the point at which you made the connection that you had a leadership role and those values that you learned influenced you and your role in Hawaii as it relates to the broader Pacific? You saw that sense, you explained this sense of responsibility and understanding this sort of bridge between the two continents on both sides of Oceania. But can you take us on your journey? Like when was it that you realized that you had a place in leadership? You became the governor, 2 terms, you were a lieutenant governor.
Yeah.
Something happened that you decided that this is my kuleana.
Yeah, what happened was reapportionment, and I realized that the one person I couldn't beat was the guy I had to run for the House of Representatives. I mean, so there's some practical reasons for doing things. So but I looked at who was running for lieutenant governor, so I could beat him. But and then you wake up one day and you find yourself, in charge. And what do you want to do? What is the vision? And here we are. Hawaii is in the center of a magnificent, in a sense, continent of its own. I mean, people think of this they think of the Pacific as a kind of, just out there with nothing much. But if you are part of this region, then you realize that this is a whole kind of experience by itself. And it is the bridge. It is the bridge. And Hawaii was always kind of the bridge because, first of all, Native Hawaiians came, and so that's our connection to Polynesia. That's our connection, a 1,000-year connection to the Pacific. But so did Asia, so did America, so did California. And so when they all came here, and it provided me with the opportunity to get to know people before getting to know where they came from. I don't know how to say that. So it was like exciting. So the first thought in your mind, was that we need to take advantage of the location. Because, every day you meet somebody who is doing something ignorant coming from someplace else, and you needed to quickly say, maybe you should look at it this way instead of that. And who could help them but better than us? And so why not do it? Now, that was all important, but probably the most exciting thing for me, since I don't know how much time we have, and I can do this forever. But the most exciting thing for me was the generation I was in. I ran for governor waiting for the day that I would turn 40. Please have I can be old enough so somebody takes me serious. It's like that. And so, meanwhile, the Pacific is full of vibrant cross currents of politics, history, and culture. It was in the late 1970s, middle 1970s and the early 1980s and 90s, this was the era of revolution. Everywhere in the Pacific. In Hawaii, we were experiencing the Hawaiian Renaissance. We were rediscovering ourselves. The University of Hawaii in 1970 went through this momentous occasion when the young people rebelled and insisted that their history be taught their way. At the same time, this was happening in Hawaii. His grandfather was in the Marshall Islands, saying that it's time for us to be our own country. You know, and I was governor and got to know these people right across the Pacific. Ratumara was a kind of they were all George Washington. He was George Washington plus, maybe. You know, but he was coming to Hawaii, talking to Governor Ariyoshi, and they created the Pacific Islands Development Program only 7 years before I became governor. So you get to know somebody like Ratumara, you get to know somebody like Jeffrey Henry, Amata, from the Marshall Islands, you know, and you see them. And one of the most powerful experiences of my life was as the youngest member of the Pacific Island Leaders Organization, which Hawaii was a part of, which was a completely Pacific-wide organization of leaders and economies, so that nobody was left out. So you had the independent nations, you had the soon-to-be independent nations, you had those still thinking, you know, it was all of this stuff. We all came together and got together. One of the, not before the Tahiti meeting, there was a meeting in Samoa, in Siva. And at that meeting, all of the legends of the Pacific, well, even people like Arnold Hammer from Nauru, you know, right across the whole Pacific, we all gathered together, and we were all at the home of Maliotoa, who at that time was the head of state, in fact, the de facto king of Samoa, and the king of Tonga. Oh, what a guy. I mean, you want to talk about a phenomenal person. The guy was bigger than this tape. I used to have a special chair made for him at Washington Place. But, you know, here's this really huge guy who was the biggest nerd that I ever knew in my life. He was, you know, he was phenomenally brilliant. In fact, to the point where he actually created the textbook that children used in Tonga to learn mathematics. You know, and it was built on the abacus. It's just kind of left-brain thinking. I mean, it was like, oh, what is this? You know, I would need to go to college to learn to read his text. You know, it's that kind of thing. And they were all sitting there. And here's this young kid from Hawaii who just happened to be governor, you know, sitting in the rest of them, and trying to learn how to smoke a cigar. You know, which was, you know, and I learned by the time I left office, but, you know, it was like, it was interesting. Okay, we all there, and we all talking about the Pacific and Hawaii's place in it. Now, I was not the only one that was excited about Hawaii's place in the Pacific. There were, you see, what an honor that I don't think that we understood, and we really we lost advantage of, when the entire leadership of the Pacific from independent countries associated states, territorial governments, everywhere voted to make PIDP the official administrative arm of the PICU. All right? So now we were the support base for this alliance of leaders. Even more important was those same people voted to make the governor of Hawaii the permanent vice chairman of the entire organization. The chairman may change and be from somewhere in the Pacific and all of this stuff, but Hawaii was going to be the center. They also voted that there would be at least one meeting a year, a term, and in those days that was a year, here in these buildings at the East-West Center. Why? Because a lot of them were schooled here. They were trained to be the George Washingtons here at Manoa. Now, if you don't catch the vision, guys, then you're sleepy like some of the politicians now running this state. You know? Because that is what this place was about. Now, you take that, I'm going to do a little bit more pontificating. You take that vision.
Go ahead, Governor.
Yeah, yeah. You take that vision, and it's exciting because that not only was good for Hawaii, that made us valuable to the big guys. See, by being that center, it all of a sudden it was important to Washington, D.C. because they don't know what to do. You know, they would keep flying out here and keep flying back, and everybody. In fact, this is a funny story. I was just telling the young man there about, you know, about when the Marshall Islands were negotiated. Masao, right? Your name? Yeah, he's a vice consul. You know, when they were negotiating for the independence, you know, they negotiating, and they were having a hard time with the Puanani, you know, from the coming down. And they never seemed to connect. And so what did the negotiators from the Marshall Islands do? They said, we got a human problem. This guy's so uptight, you know, we're having a hard time. So they actually literally strategically thought out a way to get him drunk. And when they did, everything went well. You see, now, why is this an important story? You know, it sounds just like a funny thing, but it's actually very important because it showed that there is this communication goal. And when we get selected to be part of the Pacific, and there is two requests going on. One is that these Pacific leaders didn't make Hawaii just vice chairman just because they wanted, you know, to have us on some nameplate. They did it because with the hope that Hawaii could take their concerns, their way of life, their message to America. And the State Department came to the East-West Center because they needed the same thing. Now, if your vision is big enough, think about what Japan needs in the Pacific. Think about what everywhere else across the Indo-Pacific. What was the value of an institution here? Some respects, it's the same request. Help us talk to each other. But the kauna, as the Hawaiians would say, the part under all of this is help us talk to the Pacific. Help us do that. And so it's exciting today to see the East-West Center beginning to rediscover its future. You see? Anyway, I don't know
Thank
if
you.
that makes sense, but you can.
Thank you,
what-
Governor, for
what-
taking us down this journey and to a place so that we can just imagine what it was like to have the giants of the Pacific sitting together, talking story, and really coming up with a vision for the future. So we are standing on the shoulders of giants, no doubt.
You absolutely are. And, you know, these are really good guys and people. I see Floyd sitting out there. He's supposed to write a book about Peter Coleman. I keep waiting for it. And Peter Coleman, Peter was the governor of American Samoa. He was also my father's captain in the World War II. And father said he actually had to work. He was a sergeant. But this is, you see, this place is smaller than you think. But it was only yesterday that the George Washingtons of the Pacific were walking around. And Peter was the first, I think, first governor of Samoa and later on. And he was also in charge of the American, whatever they called themselves back then, commission or something, out of Saipan at one time when they were all negotiating their new political status.
Advisor of the Trust Territory.
Yeah. So, you know, his daughter is now in
Congresswoman Radawag.
Congresswoman Radawag. Here's Tony LeBroom from Marshall Islands. His daughter is the ambassador to Geneva. I mean, this is where, you know, back then, all this stuff was, just being hopeful.
Governor, I mean, just your ability to rattle off names and going into your mind, imagining all these amazing connections that you have. And there's so much more that we could talk about. But I wondered if we could just transition. We just have a couple minutes now. That looking back at this legacy and your experiences, what would you say you see in the room, young Pacific Island leaders? We've had the Pacific Island Leadership Program just complete their second cohort here at the East West Center. Many young leaders across the region and many Pacific Islanders around the world. When we look at the economy, preserving our culture, climate challenges, what kind of advice would you give to our next generation of Pacific Island leaders who are online today and here in the room?
Yeah, dream big or go home. No, I'm serious. This is a very rich heritage. And there is a very important contribution that the Pacific can make to this world right now. I mean, in the past, we used to have this clash between, continental thinking and island thinking, where we have to deal with finite resources and the rest of maybe the world didn't see things that way. But now we got a planet that's an island. We have a planet that's an island, and the lessons that we learn on islands are becoming very important to the planet. So it's an opportunity that shouldn't be lost, and that's why the hokulea goes around the world. Take care of your little spot. Take care, malama honua. Take care of your little where you are, and that's our message. So the first thing is that we got a message, and the other thing is, get past this idea of that somehow being from the Pacific is a subtle form of inferiority. Be loud and be proud. Make yourself known, because and I totally believe this. I believe the planet needs us, and so let's give them what they want.
Thank you so much, Governor. The planet needs us. Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing with us your mana'o, your knowledge, your journey about the Pacific Way. So mahalo nui for this time, and thank you
Thank you.
again. A round of applause, please, for the governor.
Thank you.
Thank you again, President Vares-Lum and Governor Waihe'e, for those insightful conversations and reflections. Go big or go home. So many nuggets of wisdom there. I will mull over. Thank you as a young Pacific person. Now we will move on to our second talk story on tides of change in the Pacific Islands, which features 3 authors of articles featured in the inaugural issue of Visions and Voices. Visions and Voices is a quarterly publication featuring essays, articles, commentary, and concise pieces relevant to the Pacific Islands region. It is my pleasure to introduce our author panelists, who will each provide us with important insights and provoke thoughtful dialogue. I see 2 of them. If we're just looking for one more to add their camera. But by way of introduction, let me go ahead and introduce Dorell Ben is a Gujarati Rotuman woman from Fiji. Ben's art and research is primarily around reawakening Indigenous women's oceanic cultural tattoo practices and Indigenous knowledge systems across time and space. Ben's Visions and Voices article, Blood in the Water, is part of a series that explores ancestry, legacy, and the ocean, offering varied perspectives, including climate change concerns and the ongoing fight for Indigenous sovereignty in Oceania. Next, Lisepa Paeniu is a legal officer at the Pacific Community, or SPC, and has been a government lawyer for more than a decade in Tuvalu and Nauru. Lisepa was a 2015 Fulbright Scholar who received a Master of Law degree in International Human Rights Law from the University of Notre Dame. Lisepa's Visions and Voices article, entitled Tuvalu's 2023 Constitution, sums up the major reforms in Tuvalu's new constitution. Last but not least, Nitya Labh is a former James C. Gaither Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and an incoming Schwarzman Scholar at Tsinghua University in Beijing. Her research focuses on maritime security, island states, and Indo-Pacific geopolitics. Nitya's Visions and Voices article, entitled Connectivity in Crisis, The Problem with Shipping in the Pacific, highlights that Pacific Islands are the most heavily dependent region for imported fossil fuel in the world. To kick off our discussion, I would like to ask each of you to share what inspired you to choose the topic for your article. Let's begin with Ben, followed by Lisepa, and then Nitya. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kiane, and to the Pacific Islands Development Program and everybody else at the East-West Center. And yes, hello. First question, this is interesting. It's a very long, winded explanation, but I'll make it as quick as possible. My essay is actually built off a creative component, which was originally part of a creative competition for the Asia Pacific Leadership Network, the APLN, and it was specifically for the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament and climate change and Anthropocene. So my submission is Blood in the Water, a series that I had done specifically for the creative competition, but over the years, it's still something that stuck with me. So I ended up doing this particular essay because that was something I wanted to actually continue doing and raising this situational awareness, which I'm hoping most of the people could read and take away as well from it. So yeah, that's why Blood in the Water came about.
Thank you. Over to you, Lisepa.
Thank you. Talofa, everyone. Thank you again for this opportunity. I was inspired to write on our new constitution because, well, first, no one's ever done it, not yet at least. And as an Indigenous Tuvaluan lawyer, I felt it was my duty as a proud daughter of Tuvalu and a proud part of our legal society that a Tuvaluan who was involved in this constitution making should be able to be a voice sharing the new reforms that we've put in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitya.
Hi, everyone. I just want to echo what Lisepa and Dorell said earlier. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I wrote this article about a year ago. February to March 2023 marked 1 year since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And at that time, people all over the world and in Washington were talking about the impact of the war on the rest of the world. Notably missing from that conversation, however, was the Pacific Islands region. And so I felt like the absence of the Pacific from that conversation on geopolitics was emblematic of the disconnect between the Pacific, DC, and the rest of the world. For me, it was important to write this article in response to that gap. It's not that the Pacific Islands are not affected by what goes on in the rest of the world. Rather, people aren't always paying attention. And so my article, Crisis and Connectivity in Crisis, aims to identify how the Pacific Islands region is affected by geopolitical crises and what kinds of resources and efforts are necessary to address those impacts.
Thank you all for a kind of a quick summary of your articles and also giving us a little bit about the significance of each. If I could also ask if you can share maybe some of the key messages that you hope to convey in your article, feel free to answer in any order.
I'll start. Mine's pretty short. I think one of the key messages I have in Blood in the Water is literally situational awareness. And I'd like people to holistically perceive our places within the world, even though we might think that we're very singular with what we're doing in our place within the planet, within the world, we still have a lot of impact. And I think that's one of the things that Blood in the Water talks about specifically, is that important holistic picture that we need to position ourselves in. So Blood in the Water is about the situational awareness. And I think that's my key message for the essay as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
I guess I'll go next. So I have 5 major points or major reforms that I highlighted in my article. And first, and I cannot stress this enough, is that we've defined statehood. And this definition is completely new. It completely goes against international law as it is today. So we're basically telling the world that irrespective of climate change, of the adverse effects of climate change, our territory, our physical territory remains permanent. And a second point that I wanted to make was that our Bill of Rights now also has a charter of duties and responsibilities. So we've had 2 main issues in our previous constitution. In terms of human rights, we had the freedom of religion, and we also had a clash where the customary rights of the electoral district clashed with the right of an MP to choose how to decide which group in parliament he would join. And I think now in our new constitution, we've emphasized what we mean by what we value as Tuvaluans and the different practices that we want to uphold. And then I also talk a little bit about the political and judicial reforms. So good news for all Tuvaluans out there. If you've practiced for more than 5 years as a lawyer, you can become a judge. Now, this is a very good thing because in our previous constitution, you would have to have been a judge in another jurisdiction before you could become eligible. And to date, not a single Tuvaluan has become a judge in any other jurisdiction. So that just meant none of us could become judges. And then, of course, there's the win in terms of equality before the law. So now our non-discrimination clause includes sex and disability. And a last key takeaway is that our independent entities, the PSC, we've removed powers from it. So now the head of state appoints the top advisors, being the Secretary to Government, the Attorney General, the Auditor General, and the Commissioner of Police, based on the advice of Cabinet. But before, it was in consultation with Cabinet, which meant that PSC had the power to appoint whoever they wanted without Cabinet's influence. It's a good thing and a bad thing. I'll discuss that later, I guess. And the Attorney General no longer sits in Parliament. We have Parliament live on Facebook, if you don't know. So before, you would always see my previous boss sitting there giving advice, and now she no longer sits there. So we have a Parliamentary Council that advises just Parliament, which is good because before our office would, the Attorney General's office would advise Cabinet, and then during Parliament sittings, we'd also have to advise Parliament. And I think a final point I wanted to mention was that we also have removed the prosecutorial powers of the Attorney General. So now there's an established office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. I think those are the 5 main points that sum up my article. Thank you.
I can take it from here, I guess the last one. I wrote about energy security in the Pacific. And so my 2 big takeaways, the first one is island nations experience global crises differently. And the Pacific Islands in particular is the most heavily dependent region in the world for imported fossil fuels. So allies and partners must take that into consideration, the Pacific's unique geography and their vulnerabilities when engaging with regional stakeholders. And the second big takeaway is that climate adaptation efforts that are driven by the experiences and interests of outside partners are often misaligned with Pacific realities. So efforts to decrease fossil fuel dependency and emissions require resources to test and scale non-carbon alternatives and increase data collection about the shipping industry in the Pacific. Major powers like the United States continue to pursue supply chain security and resilience around the world, but they haven't yet done so with the Pacific in mind. And so my article really tries to emphasize what that would look like.
Thank you. Thank you. And I really enjoyed reading and editing all of your articles. And I feel like the questions that I'm asking you really allow people to kind of read it in conversation. And I hope you also do read the actual text afterwards. But we had a discussion when we were doing our sound check. Some of you found some interesting surprises during your research. I wanted to kind of probe that further and ask if you might be able to share some of the surprises that came up while you were writing or while you're doing the research for your article.
Do we want to stick to the order?
Okay. We'll go Lisepa, then Nitya and Ben.
Yeah, okay. Me?
Oh, Lisepa and then Nitya.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So just 2 surprises came up when I was doing this research. I think the first one, which was really big, I think, was section 15, subsection 6, in that Parliament gets to decide whether to eliminate, whether a traditional standard, value, or practice contravenes a law or any act done under a valid law. So when I read this clause, I was thinking, why on earth and how on earth did this get into our Constitution? because, I mean, that is the prerogative of a court, to determine whether a law is good or bad, to strike it down. I felt that they took away the power of the High Court to do that in that particular clause, because they're basically giving Parliament the power to decide whether or not, I think that was a major one. And I really look forward to seeing someone challenge that particular clause, because it should be a very interesting topic. And I guess the other one was that a clause or a section that did survive the previous constitution is section 28. And it reads that the fact that certain rights and freedoms are referred to in this constitution does not mean that there may not be other rights and freedoms retained by the people or conferred by law. Given that there's so much emphasis in our new constitution on traditional values, practices, and responsibilities, I was surprised that this clause is maintained, because it's also open to interpretation, like in terms of when people would bring a constitutional case in terms of the Bill of Rights, the interpretation of the Bill of Rights, or a clash between the Bill of Rights and our Charter of Duties and Responsibilities. It's just interesting how whether the courts would interpret this as broad as I think it is, or whether they're going to limit this particular section. Thank you.
Maybe not so surprising for me in my work, but notable is that in the Pacific, there have been efforts to reduce fossil fuel reliance, but they have almost exclusively focused on the use of fuel for electricity generation. And while that's an important part, the truth is that most of the fossil fuel usage in the Pacific goes into the shipping industry. And so, again, when we talk about the outside priorities of partners and how that gets imposed upon Pacific agendas, I think that's kind of the point there. For example, 2013, the Pacific Energy Summit in New Zealand committed $535 million to reduce regional diesel dependency, or the US doing a report about advancing transportation and energy efficiency in Tonga, with the sole focus on electric vehicles and land-based power. None of this included sea transport or shipping, which is such a huge part of what we call these ocean nations. And so it seems, again, like a mismatch, and maybe it's not surprising, but I think that it definitely stands out.
Thank you. Ben?
Mine's a lot shorter. I think one of the things that I found when I was doing Blood in the Water is literally how hard paper weaving is, in all honesty. As much as that sounds very easy that we used to do back in kindergarten or primary school, I think paper weaving as an art form is very difficult. So one of the things I learned from doing paper weaving especially was noting how Pacific people across the Oceania literally weave. And I think it's amazing how the skill and art form to be able to do that. Yeah, that's one of my surprising discoveries, is literally paper weaving is hard. So that's my addition.
And I appreciate that. And that's also kind of why we wanted to have kind of an eclectic panel of authors here. The next two iterations will also be quite eclectic in terms of the different issues and topics that are covered. But since we only have a few more minutes on this panel, I'd just like to ask if you folks can help us like apply this to what we can do as individuals, what communities can do to address the issues or topics that you've raised in your article. Let's go the reverse way. Let's do Ben, Nitya, and then Lisepa.
Cool. One of the things I have for one of the major takeaways I think that a lot of people can do within communities is to prioritize stories and our story sovereignties. Usually you find people that's at the front line of working against climate change, Anthropocenes, these particular fights, I would say, it's usually the people that are at the front line that don't necessarily have their voices out there. And I think it's important to listen to that particular foundational group of people, or the groundbreaking people that do these work. Their stories are important. And I find that one of the things I'd like to highlight, especially for our communities to take away, is to prioritize your story, the visions that you have for your future, for our planet, because your place in the world is actually really important. And yeah, that's one of the things that I really want our communities to look into is no matter what small thing you are doing, no small feat is too small. It's really important because it ripples across our time and our space. It echoes for our future generations as well to be able to make what they have to make based on the foundations that we have in the present, based on what we know of our past. So that's what I hope our communities can do.
Thanks for that takeaway, Ben. I'm actually gonna take from your ideas a little bit and build on them. I would say, this conversation about energy, a lot of it really is a conversation about how other people, partners, policymakers engage with the Pacific, and doing so in a way that focuses on listening and understanding the priorities of those in the region. So rather than bringing the agendas of Washington or elsewhere to the Pacific, asking what are the needs of the people in the Pacific, listening to their communities and their policymakers, and shaping our diplomatic efforts by finding alignment in those priorities rather than trying to fit the Pacific into priorities that we have for ourselves.
So it's my turn. So I guess for Tuvalu's constitution, I like to encourage the individuals that have raised concerns about especially human rights and how it's been watered down in this constitution. The only way to get an interpretation or an interpretation on these new clauses is through the court. So please do use the court system. It's there. Venting on social media platforms doesn't do much. So yes, I think that's the best advice I could give.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you. Due to the time, I think that'll need to be our last question for this panel. But, oh, I'm sorry. Did I cut you off? It looks like the internet is a little unstable on our end. My apologies. Okay. But that we'll have to have that be the last question for our panel. So thank you to all of our author panelists for your insightful contributions and engaging discussions. It was really interesting because you all three have different issues that you're able to highlight, from separation of power, things happening with the Tuvalu Constitution, and Nitya pointing out kind of disconnect between policies from partner countries and what it looks like on the ground when it comes to energy security, and Nitya talking about kind of holistic approaches. I really appreciate what you said about no action being too small. So with that, although our talk story session has concluded, the conversation shouldn't end here. I encourage everyone to continue these important discussions beyond this room and to explore how we can apply the ideas shared today in our own work and communities. I also want to extend a heartfelt mahalo and thank you to our audience who submitted through the Zoom registration many thoughtful comments and questions to us in advance as well. Several of you through your Zoom registration expressed that you're glad to see the Pacific Islands report back in action. And we look forward to your continued support and involvement. Our in-person attendees, please join us for a photo in the third floor lobby just outside this room, followed by a reception where we can continue this conversation in a more informal setting. Also, to our guests, as you exit on the first floor, we invite you to explore the East West Center Art Program's gallery exhibition entitled Ho'okahewai, Ho'ulu Aina, Follow and Community. This exhibition shares mo'olelo and artistry from both the Ohana community that have been touched by Kapapolo'i o Kanewai, which is the lo'i right here on the UH campus, through works of art, video, sound, installations, and photographs. To our online audience, our next talk story with Visions and Voices authors will be same time next week on Zoom. Hope to see you there. And then our last talk story for this issue will be the week after next, same day, same time. Mahalo, everyone. Thank you.